President Trump recently announced universal and reciprocal tariffs against almost every single country on April 2nd, 2025, which he labeled as Liberation Day. A chart displayed by the president contained both the tariffs that each country was charging USA allegedly and the reciprocal taxes that were going to be levied by the USA against that country. You can see the second column corresponding to each country is labeled in fine print, tariffs charged to the USA, and then in even finer print, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. The way these tariffs were calculated by the Trump admin was easily worked out by experts. However, it was so rudimentary and misleading that people were struck with disbelief. The formula seemed to take the U.S. trade deficit in physical goods with each country, divided it by the total U.S. imports of goods from that country, and turned that into a percentage. As you can see, it had nothing to do with actual tariffs. So, perhaps in order to display a semblance of creativity, the White House came out with a formula that at least looked complicated to the average person, but on closer inspection it becomes clear that it was a failed attempt at even appearing complicated. This is the formula that was published by the White House. Substituting each variable with what it actually stands for, the equation becomes like this. Now, the sensitivity of customers to higher prices was set at 4 and the likelihood of prices to increase at 0.25, multiplying which yields 1, which we know can simply be eliminated from the equation. So, what we are left with is total exports to the US minus total US imports, also divided by the latter. The numerator is just another way to represent the US trade deficit, and surprise, surprise, we are left with the same rudimentary and unrelated equation that experts had already calculated. We can substitute actual numbers for, say, China, and see that this is exactly how tariffs were calculated by the Trump admin. US had a trade deficit of $295.4 billion with China this past year, with total US imports from China worth $438.9 billion the same year. Substituting these values, we find the exact tariff that the chart displays, and then the halved tariff that President Trump benevolently decided to levy on China. Furthermore, another inexplicable peculiarity is that there are many countries that are tariffed at 10%. This was because with all these countries the US actually enjoyed a trade surplus. But instead of following his own advertised logic, President Trump increased their tariff by 10% anyways.